I have the pleasure of serving as the director of the North Carolina African American Heritage Commission. Again, I am so thrilled that you are joining us today and to help us fulfill our mission, which is to preserve, promote, and protect North Carolina's African American history, arts, and culture for all people. To this end, it's our joy to create resources and opportunities like what you're experiencing today. This is the third webinar in the Commission's 6-part webinar series, Sustaining North Carolina's African American Heritage Institutions During COVID-19. Now, during this series, we have been exploring how our state's Black heritage institutions can think innovatively about navigating the pandemic, with the insights of heritage practitioners and culture workers from across the country, like today's guests, who I will introduce shortly. The North Carolina African American Heritage Commission received an NC Cares Humanities Relief Grant from the North Carolina Humanities Council to execute this series. You can learn more about the North Carolina Humanities Council online at www.nchumanities.org. Funding for NC Cares has been provided by the National Endowment for the Humanities as part of the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act Economic Stabilization Plan. Today, for our guests, please feel free to drop your questions in the chat where it will be monitored, and we will work to answer questions at the end of today's conversation. But again, please drop them in the chat so we can keep track of them. I also want to thank the members of my team who made today possible. Adrian Nearday, Associate Director of the North Carolina African American Heritage Commission, Kima Lassiter, Arts and Outreach Coordinator for the Commission, and Erica Johnson, who is a graduate student in North Carolina Central University's History Program, as well as Joel Cook, an emerging museum professional. We should note that both Erica and Joel's work is being funded through this grant. I'd also like to say a special hello to Kyrie Mason and Cliff Whitfield, who you will see as guests on today's webinar. Each of these men is a graduate student at North Carolina Central University and the University of North Carolina at Greensboro, respectively, whose participation in today's webinar is again funded through this grant. I should also note that today's webinar will be available via recording, and all participants will receive the link. You can learn more about upcoming webinars in this series online at aahc.nc.gov or via our Facebook page. In the meantime, I'm thrilled to welcome our presenters for today, Relevance and Sustainability During Times of Crisis. Brent Leggs is the Executive Director of the African American Cultural Heritage Action Fund. Envisioned as a social movement for justice, equity, and reconciliation, the Action Fund is promoting the role of cultural preservation and telling the nation's full history, while also empowering activists, entrepreneurs, artists, and civic leaders to advocate on behalf of African American historic places. Brent's passion for elevating the significance of Black culture and American history is visible through his work, which elevates the remarkable stories and places that evoke centuries of Black activism, achievement, and community. Juanita Moore is a professional with over 30 years of museum experience. She has served as a curator, educator, administrator, and museum planner. Most recently, Moore served as the president and CEO of the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History in Detroit, Michigan. And she recently retired from this role. Prior to this role, she served as executive director of the American Jazz Museum, the Gym Theater, located in the 18th and Vine Historic District in Kansas City, Missouri, and is the founding executive director of the National Civil Rights Museum in Memphis, Tennessee. We are also so very proud that Juanita Moore serves as a commissioner on the North Carolina African American Heritage Commission. And finally, Vedet Coleman-Robinson serves as the executive director for the Association of African American Museums. Prior to this role, she served for 11 years as a grants management specialist with the State, Tribal, Local Plans, and Grants Division of the National Park Service. During her time at the National Park Service, Vedet was the program lead for the Historically Black Colleges and Universities Grant and the Underrepresented Communities Grant Program for State, Tribal, Local Plans, and Grants Division. Brent, Juanita, and Vedet, thank you so much for joining us today.
A pleasure.
Yes. So to get started on our chat, Vedet, what specific challenges do you see African American cultural institutions experiencing now in this time of pandemic and also this time of social cultural upheaval? And also, how is the Association of African American Museums helping these institutions to navigate these realities?
Well, first, Angela, thank you so much for inviting me to speak. It's always a pleasure to be able to serve AAAM, but to also be able to speak to your colleagues and stakeholders. And also for me, it's an extra special time because I get to do this with Juanita Moore and Brent Legs, who I absolutely positively revere so much. They've been such a wonderful help throughout my whole entire career. So when we say lift as we climb, just know that that's exactly what these folks have done for me throughout my whole entire career as I stepped, not just in AAAM, but Park Service and before that, the museum field. So thank you. I wanted to get that out because I would be remiss if I did not give props to the people who came before me to allow me to be in this position. So for us, the challenge really stood in the beginning, right? So March, when COVID hit us, on a national level, our museum started closing, temporarily closing, and I have to say that for legal purposes because people will start yelling at me. But we started temporarily closing one by one for safety reasons. We did not understand COVID. We still don't understand COVID. Let me actually get that correct right now. COVID, we didn't know what would happen, and everybody really wanted to be very, very conscious of what was happening health-wise. So while we were temporarily closed, funding sources stopped, right? The first thing that majority of my museums decided really quickly were to zero out their public programming. And then also any professional development. Those were the first things to go. And then if they could not, find suitable funding, then they went on a longer stretch of temporarily closing. But the beauty in all of this is as we were navigating, trying to figure out how we were going to raise funds, stay open, become sustainable. We're in 2020, and as horrible as 2020 has been for all of us, we're at a time where we can have Zoom meetings. We're at a time where, we can still connect to one another, and that was a gift. So things could actually start moving again, which public programming moved to be in virtual spaces, just as what you're doing today. We just had, AAAM just had our first all virtual conference ever in August, and we had the highest attendance that we've ever had. And this was really the trend of, and Brent just had a wonderful, I'll let him speak for himself, I'm not gonna do that, but he did just have a wonderful conference himself at the Trust. But you know, this was the trend for all of our museums. And then as far as social, oh, and then let me just take one step back. The beauty of AAAM is we have always seen hard times, whether, you know, it's creating your museum, finding the funding to do collections. Sometimes we have to be very, very, we have to have some ingenuity. We have to be nimble. So COVID coming, although it was a crisis, this was something that we were also very well positioned to do. Find funding from streams that, you know, you may not have known before. And then with the civil unrest, a lot of our museums, although they were temporarily closed, since majority of us were established from the community and out of the community, we became beacons of hope for communities. You know, our museums, they have been, before we had to temporarily close, they were places where, you know, they served the community, not just by public programming, but also becoming things like places for kids to learn, community centers, right? So what wound up happening when COVID hit, and also through all of this civil unrest, which is also not new to us, we came out of a protest movement, is people actually started coming back to our museums. And when I say that, although our museums were temporarily closed, if there was a protest going on, they came to our museums as a safe haven. So you may have started at City Hall, but you came to our museum, and that was kind of like a pilgrimage. It was a place that was all, you know, the fundamentals and the foundation were already laid for people to feel safe, for people to voice their opinions and discuss the things that are going on in everybody's community in social injustice. So it really just, it really solidified who we are and what we are and who we serve. And I think I'm going to stop there because I'm not the only panelist on today, but I feel that I kind of summarized that whole thing. That's really what has been happening with us. And I'm sure that you guys have been seeing the same on the ground where you are.
Yes. Thank you. And to your point, this is not the only crisis that Black museums have experienced navigating. And also, this is not the only sort of financial or social or cultural crisis that Black museums, again, have navigated through in the past. And to this end, Juanita, you have seen a major institution through crisis. I'm thinking specifically you navigating the 2008 recession at the Charles H. Wright Museum in Detroit. Please talk to us about that experience. And what did you learn that we can benefit from or put into practice now?
She's asking if I want to unmute.
Yeah.
Once again, thank you for being here. This is a wonderful opportunity to have a discussion about the kinds of things that's going on in our institutions, because at this point in the country, our institutions are needed more than ever. And the work that we do is so important, not just to the country, but to our communities. And as you know, we all have always, the museums having been founded oftentimes through struggle by communities and individuals with very few dollars, built by just community struggle. We always have had to really work very hard to make sure that we are getting our institutions up and operating and serving the community. And we've come through some very non-traditional ways to open museums and get them operating. So it is important that we know that it is important that we continue the work no matter how many struggles we face. And we all know that in 2008, the country hit a recession, and in Detroit, we hit a depression. We had both General Motors and Chrysler go into complete bankruptcy. The city went into bankruptcy, and our cultural institutions suffered greatly. Not just the Charles H. Wright Museum, the Detroit Historical Society, the Detroit Institute of the Arts, the Science Center, all of our institutions really struggled mightily. In fact, the Science Center closed. And it was a very tough time for us. But I think that, knowing that it was a tough time, but it was also important that we look at how we were going to survive. The first thing we did was we decided that no matter how tough things got, that we could not just hunker down and barely keep our doors open and not do anything to serve the community. That we had to say that we were going to serve the community, because as we all know, times do get better. And as
Looks like we've lost just a little.
not reduce our hours. Whereas all of these, I'm sorry?
Okay, we lost you at times do get better, which I think was a good place to to sit in. Good space to sit in.
Yes, times do get
Yes.
better. And when those times get better, we want to make sure that, the funding sources say, we want to keep that institution going that served the community when things were bad. We want the community to stand up for us and say that no matter what happens in this community, if that we want this institution to survive and we want it supported. And that's what we did. We decided that we would not reduce our hours. All of the other cultural institutions reduced their hours. Now, that doesn't mean that we didn't close our doors at 5 o'clock, or we stayed open all the times. If there wasn't a program, we closed the doors. But as long as there was a program, or it was time for our regular visiting hours, we kept those doors open. We did not reduce that to the public. And the other thing that we did is we said, we're going to figure out what do we need to do to the community? What does the community need? And at that point, all of the, a lot of the nonprofit organizations, other cultural organizations were really suffering. They couldn't do their programming. They didn't have places to do their programming. So we said, okay, we have a space. And lots of people have ideas, lots of artists, they have works that they want to do. Artists have exhibitions and work that they want to exhibit. So what we will do is we will use our space. We will partner with folks in the community on all kinds of levels. And we will use our space. We have a place. So, and we will bring you in, and we will be your partner, and we will do programming. We will do things that serve the community, including a programming for breastfeeding mothers. We brought, the foundation had a program, the Kresge Foundation had a program where they had been working with mothers, teaching young mothers and encouraging them to breastfeed. So we said, okay, we'll partner with you and have this programming here. And what we would do is we would add to it. We will make sure that those young mothers have books that they're reading to their children and their babies in their tummies, so that they will continue to start to nurture them and build them up. We gave them children's stories, Black history stories that they would read to their children. So we became a part of lots of different kinds of programs in the community. And so as a result, we increased our programming by over 50%. And had so little money, there was so little money, we ended up having over 150 programs that year. We started to look at other kinds of issues that were important in the community. And I think that's the kinds of things that we're learning right now as institutions, that, you even have science centers now that they're dealing with equity and justice, science museums. And so we started to look at issues beyond some of the specific programs traditional programs that we had always done. And when we were able to move, the city got better, the economy got better, we were able to tell that story. We had a story to tell to all of the funders, to the foundations, to the individuals, to corporations. And therefore, we were able to increase our funding, not just locally, but nationally as well. It became a part of a national story for us. We expanded the number of partners that we had. We changed we revised our mission statement and our vision statement, and used that to help people understand and get a much better idea of how to work with us and what we wanted to do. We said we wanted an open mind and change lives. So, and utilizing African American history. And basically, that's what all African American museums want to do. That's what they were based on in terms of their founding. So we just put that in our mission statement: opening minds and changing lives. And so it worked really well for us, and we were able to not only get significant funding from the local foundations, national foundations, but really build our individual giving. We started a gala that individuals started doing, and it became one of the best galas in the city. And in the 5th year of the gala, we raised $1.8 million in that gala. So creating partnerships, thinking differently, and expanding how we thought about what we did. It was the same things we always did, but we did it a little differently and looked at it differently, as institutions are doing now. They are reinventing themselves. They're looking at the kinds of things that they have to start doing, and some of the things they have to stop doing when they don't have the funding, but looking more about what they can start doing to help to build their communities. And as we are now, we are looking at the kinds of things that's happening in this country overall, in terms of not just the economic challenges, but also the challenges that we are having in terms of how we deal with each other. And African American history is something that is really good in teaching this country how to live up to its creative democracy. So I think that those are the kinds of we look at. We look at what the challenges are, how we are best suited to serve our community and the broader community in helping to meet those challenges as we run our institutions day to day. And if we do that, that is something that we can take to funders and be able to say, this is how we can help our communities. This is how we help individuals in our communities. This is how we help the country. And I think we're able to survive and get funding based on that.
Thank you. Now, Juanita, you have alluded to this, and Vedet, you touched on this as well. You mentioned that Black museums have always had to be nimble and creative, in part because it appears that our institutions and our people are living in sort of constant states of crises, even beyond moments of cultural upheaval, right? What we're seeing is something that Black people navigate on a day-to-day basis. So I would ask you, beyond our current cultural moment, how would you encourage institutions to navigate African American heritage preservation work with this frame of reference, right? That crises or advocating for social justice does not stop here. It doesn't stop when the heat is off. And this is a question for all of our participants, all of our speakers.
Okay, I think we were trying to figure out who was going to go first, and we were staring one another in the eyes and nobody moved. So I'll jump in. For us, it's really, we've always done this work, right? It's always been, like you said, we've always been in a state of crises. So now is a time, because they're still not quiet, right? They're still not quiet. I just feel like now is a time where we have some time to kind of recalibrate and figure out some things. Now is a time for us to be a little bit more aggressive with what we want. We're always really aggressive, right? And I'm not just saying Black people in general, I'm just saying the museum field in general. We have to be aggressive for our funding, but I think now is the time where we can kind of hold people's feet to the fire and say, you've never done this, and now is the time for you to do it. I'm not going to call out any foundations on this call because I feel like that would probably hurt my chances later on, but trying to get funding for AAAM. So, but this is a time for, just to hold people's feet to the fire and say, I've looked at what you've done for the past, 50 years. You've been in existence for 200 or 100. And in this time, you haven't really touched this community, and we would really like to partner with you. I think that what Brent does at the National Trust is phenomenal. And again, I'll let him speak for himself. I'm not going to do that for him. And then it's really just figuring out ways to have collaborations. Collaborations are the main thing that any of us in this field can do for one another. Not only does it help raise your visibility, but it really shows funders and it shows the public that you can work with others. And that's really important. Funders for real want to see that. They want to see that you can work with others, but not just that, it really elevates your power and growth. If you can't partner with other organizations and other museums and other cultural institutions, you remain stagnant. You do need fresh ideas, and you do need to be able to show your stakeholders that you can do those things.
Thank you. Brent, Juanita, any thoughts on how we can encourage institutions to navigate with social justice at the center?
Yeah, I just want to make sure that this moment isn't just a trend. Mm-hmm. And so I think in the way that we incorporate social justice language in our case statements for funding, and the way that we are clear in defining equity-driven outcomes that are quantifiable and measurable, that we spend enough time conducting research, understanding the needs of these social justice-driven philanthropies, philanthropic organizations. And the shift has started happening before 2020. If you look at Ford and Mellon and JPB and some of the other foundations, they literally have revised their philanthropy through the lens of social justice. And in order for preservation to be relevant to their mission, we've got to do that research. We've got to be concise and sharp in our language and messaging. And what I see often with the many historic sites that we work with or house museums, we are really fantastic at communicating a moral imperative for the preservation of Black history. We are very weak on communicating the operational needs, the structural needs to be able to sustain and create relevant cultural anchors within our communities. And that's what Juanita and Vedet have been communicating, is that the power of African American historic places, that we are not just centers of learning and of culture, but we can help stimulate economic development, and we anchor community in many ways. And so if we can build our capacity with the moral imperative along with the business of preservation, then I think we will be more competitive and successful in our fundraising in this moment. And Vedet just said it. We should be ambitious in our requests to funders. We should be sophisticated in our approach, and we should seize this moment to secure new partnerships and opportunity to expand and grow.
Thank you.
I think that we also have always made a way out of, made a way out of no way. We figured that out. And I think that the solutions and see as we can in thinking about how we meet the needs of our communities and our people, and think of utilizing the history to help people to create the that right now has shown us more than ever the importance of knowing and understanding history. Because if we can't come up with dealt with, we start to find ourselves talking to us about things that we go like, but that already is. No, that's not true. We need to understand. We need to learn from history, and we understand it.
Juanita, I agree with you completely, and I think
the African American history in many.
Juanita, I was just going to say I agree with you completely, and I think if we're able to make that connection between the history that we work to preserve, and if we begin to highlight the legacies of slavery and redlining and disinvestment and inadequate education related to the Black experience in America and all of these inequities, and communicate how that has negatively impacted Black communities, Black historic neighborhoods, Black museums, that's where our relevancy comes in, and that's how we're able to make those equity-driven arguments for funding. What you just said is spot on.
And those things then actually in the development of our white museums and all of the other things. So as we help them, we talk about, as I said, now many cultural institutions, including science museums, are saying that they are dealing with injustice or justice and equity and all of those issues and for the community and how they serve people. So I think that we need to make sure that as they are creating their solutions and their programs, that they do have that full view of America and American history. So yes.
Thank you. Now, Brent, you regularly encourage grassroots groups to leverage collaboration, as a means towards building sustainable models for their projects. Why is this approach valuable, and how can groups work with local partners to execute this type of work? And if you could also share an example of what this looks like in practice, that would be helpful as well.
Yeah, so partnerships are key to being relevant and sustainable. And some of the partnership models that I promote that I think work are co-stewardship agreements. And that really means that there is more than one steward to care for the long-term maintenance and preservation of a historic asset, building, landscape. They're also helping to cover the operational cost to be able to engage the public and connect the public to this history and to these places. So co-stewardship agreements can be just 2 individuals, or they can be expanded all the way to 4 or 5. One example of that is the Louis Armstrong House Museum in Queens, New York. The building is owned by the city of New York. The nonprofit is the Louis Armstrong House and Museum. So they manage the tours and the interpretation, promotion, public engagement. You have the Family Foundation that provides about $100,000 annually to support operations. And then you have a partnership with Queens College. They cover the executive director's salary, but they also manage and conserve the Louis Armstrong artifacts and collections, and they use that as part of their educational mission. I would love to see more African American historic places grow their partnerships to that kind of scale and sophistication to help steward this history. In North Carolina, I think a partnership that I think is just most beautiful is around the Nina Simone Childhood Home. And I want to give a big shout out to the North Carolina African American Heritage Commission, the North Carolina Arts Council, to the State Historic Preservation Office, Preservation North Carolina, even University of North Carolina, where Darren Waters teaches. We were intentional about bringing together a statewide coalition. We were also intentional about collaborating with the African American leaders at these institutions, because we wanted to demonstrate the exceptional stewardship capacity of North Carolina's Black preservation community. And for some of you online, if you don't know anything about the project, 4 New York City-based visual artists, when the house was threatened, they would organize themselves, create a LLC. They would pool their money together. I think they purchased the property for $95,000. And they partnered with the National Trust, and then we extended the partnerships, the ones that you just heard about, and then also nationally, World Monuments Fund and some other groups. And we are leading the effort with this local and national coalition to develop a stewardship plan for the long-term preservation, interpretation, and access to Nina Simone's birthplace in Tryon, North Carolina. And I'm glad to say that we have now protected the property in perpetuity. Preservation North Carolina holds the preservation easement on the property. We've had our Hope crew there, so youth learning preservation trades that restore the exterior of the house and painted it white. We had the most amazing art-centric programming that was funded and sponsored by the Commission and the Arts Council, where we had Nina Simone's daughter fly over from France at a tribute concert last summer that was remarkable, and it was such a beautiful community event. And I could go on and on about the ways that we've engaged a diverse coalition in North Carolina, but I use this as an example to say that preservation often is, let's restore the building. And once that's done, we have not put in the infrastructure to develop the right operational model for that business. It's, nonprofits are businesses. And so we often think in the short term. And when we look at these kinds of projects, we see them to be replicable and national models, because we're not just looking at the short term, we are looking at a long-term perpetual strategy that will ensure the relevancy, the public access, but most importantly, the financial sustainability of these places.
Thank you, Brent. And that's actually an incredible segue to the next sort of question that I'm thinking of, in that sustain does not equal maintain, right? Sustainability looks beyond surviving the now and considers longevity. So to each of you, what are some ways that cultural heritage leaders can think expansively about investing in opportunities that will create sustainable futures for Black heritage?
I have a great example from one of our members. When COVID first hit, I was trying to look for ways in which our museums could not just raise money for right now, and exactly what Brent and Juanita have said, not be trendy right now because everybody wants to give money because they feel bad. What can we do to continue to sustain ourselves? And one of our members told us that in addition to owning their museum building, because it was a storefront, their organization also purchased another building in which they rent out for whatever, right? So they rent it out for events and things like that. Now, of course, that in social distancing, you cannot do that. And I said, well, how did you guys raise that money? Like, you raised the money to burn your mortgage, which is really great, but how did you raise the money to purchase another building? And they said that they had a funder who wanted to, an anonymous funder who wanted to help out, and they wound up just passing the plate. And that's, that's really what our museums do. And Juanita knows very well, before we have a chance to start going to funders, we have to pass the plate and start thinking like churches. How do we continue to maintain the building fund, and make sure that everything stays? But I thought that was such a great example. And they also told me that they're in the process of purchasing an investment property in which they will house people in there, so that it'll be an apartment building, and it won't be many units, but it's just a few. And I thought that was really thinking outside of the box during this time. And I'm asking them again, well, how are you going to do that? Because a lot of federal funds don't pay for new buildings. And the answer is still the same. We have a very good funder who loves us. We've cultivated this relationship throughout the years. And that's really what fundraising is. You can have some of the top people give funding to you, but if you don't maintain those relationships so that you can continue to stay relevant, and then they'll introduce you to other people, right? And if they don't, sometimes it's just having those couple of grants that will raise your visibility, and then people will say, well, I want to give to this topic, or I want to give to this as well, or I want to give to this effort. But I think that those two things were really great, and it falls right in line with what Brent said. Sometimes it's just thinking a little bit more like a business, creating an LLC, starting to do some preservation work, figuring out what needs to happen in order to remain relevant and sustainable. And partnerships are really great, obviously. I can never, not state that. I feel that, we can't do it by ourselves all the time. So partnerships are really great.
Thank you. Juanita, any thoughts from you around how?
I think.
Go ahead.
Yes, I think that we can, you do need to think about how you build endowments. That is a difficult thing, but there are people who will who will think about how you survive long term. And we work to build that, so that individual giving within our communities. And I think that's the thing that we struggle with a lot, especially our institutions struggle with, the building the individual giving, because we start to think about, we don't have people that's going to give us $1 million, or we don't have people that's going to give us $100,000. I think that we can learn a lot from these political campaigns about the way we can encourage people to give to our institutions at the level that they can afford, and they will do it. And we just have to figure out how, like she said, develop those relationships and maintain those relationships. And start to look at how we build money for that. And for, positions for like a curator, get a curator's position endowed, start to talk to people about the kinds of programming that they want at your institution, and help them start to endow those. And it doesn't have to be huge amounts of money. There, I've met with any number of people, that wanted to endow a program at $25,000, and they would pay it $5,000 a year. Well, it could be a simple program, but we also think about the challenges within our communities, and how do we connect ourselves with those solving the problems of those challenges. Education is one. All of our institutions have challenges with education. How do we participate with the education system to make sure that we are providing part of the solution to that, to those challenges, and that the funding is there for that? We look for ways to have individuals support that. And so developing those relationships with people to give us, support us on an ongoing basis, and not at levels that people can't afford. And think about, oftentimes we think that we say we don't have individual givers, Black communities don't support stuff. But when they do, you can utilize that. For example, I had a donor that would give me $100,000 a year, the museum, $100 a year, but I had to match it. And can you imagine? People were happy to give $10, $15, $25 to match, to try to come up to that $100,000 that we were going to automatically get if they did that. We had another program. You give a grant, and people will give that grant. They make monthly payments to do that. And once again, that $1,000 that they were giving over a period of time would then get matched by another someone that that could afford to give a large amount. So we just have to be creative and think about how we look to sustain our institutions. And the sustainability is not always about money. It is sometimes about, how we look at developing, our leadership, and building and training our staff so that we can sustain the ability to take care of our collections, and have the expertise to be able to do that and build that. So it's not always, the sustainability is not always about, money. We can look at sustaining our programming and our institution and fulfilling our mission in a number of different ways.
Thank you. And I am so glad that you made that last point in particular, right? That the sustainability is not simply about money. You've called out relationship building as a sustainability tool, investing in staff development, succession planning. Again, all of these things can help create sustainable futures for Black museums. So again, thank you for calling that out, Juanita. Any thoughts from you, Brent?
I think Juanita just pretty much summarized it, but I just want to affirm what she said about endowments. So when we look at the cultural institutions in the U.S. that are able to stay the course during an economic crisis and a health crisis, it's the larger institutions that have endowments. I think the big dream amongst all of us is to position the most iconic and most representative house museums and historic sites in Black history to have some scale of endowment that can sustain operations in the short term. You know, even if it was $1 million and you could draw down 5,000, I mean, that would benefit an organization in this moment. But for me, it's trying to get at least 10 institutions to have endowments of $10 million plus, and to create that national model and blueprint for other historic sites. You know, I'm actually in the process of creating a $4 million endowment for my position, and have raised about 65% of that in the last 2 years. And Juanita is right. It's really tough to fundraise through individual giving. Most of our avenues for financial support is either foundations trying to access and engage corporations, and that comes with a whole different, you know, set of metrics and cultivation tactics. But if we are able to replicate the kind of shift in culture, people pay to watch Black is King on Disney when that came out. You know, as I think about it, I need to cancel my subscription because, you know, I'm still paying for that. You know, you got Netflix and Hulu, and so if we can find a way to replicate that's different than membership, because membership it's such labor intensive, and the quality to be able to cultivate a funder on a monthly basis. But if we can find a new way to be relevant enough to supplement the activities of the church, because the Black community understands giving to our churches. And if we can position ourselves as the supplemental anchoring institutions, and again, find ways to have that reoccurring monthly small scale donation. So we're working at the top level, but we're also working at the community level. I think that's a strategy for sustainability.
I just want to say that I think Juanita hit it on the head when she said that I think that we can learn a lot from the political campaigns. One of the things that I feel made, well, other than the fact that I just aligned with a lot of what he was saying, but I think one of the things that made President Barack Obama so, you know, relatable to all of us really is when he asked for funds, he didn't, I mean, yes, he asked for the big funds, but he said, well, give what you can. I mean, I could tell you that email blast that I would get, I never felt like, oh my gosh, here he is again asking me for my $5. I was proud to give that $5. We've kind of seen the same thing with AAAM. Like, our membership has gone up 88% in the past 18 months that I've been here. And that's something that I was very intentional about, just to make sure that our members saw things, that made sure that, you know, we had programming, made sure that it came from in their museums. And we have this, and Juanita, she and I were speaking one day, and she said, Vedet, you know, when I was at the museum, I had this funder that gave $100 a month. And to, you know, to other people, it didn't look like $100. You know, it didn't look like it was a lot, but it was a lot to me because I could depend on that $100 a month. And I said, oh my gosh, you're absolutely correct. I mean, I never discounted that, but I have a member who gives $5 a month with PayPal, so there's fees involved. But I cheer and I call her each time that payment comes through, because that's her subscription to us, and that's beyond her membership. So, you know, it's really just connecting to people and making sure that those you know, your communication stays relevant, and then also just making sure that you maintain your partnerships and your visibility to your members, and what they need in the community.
And sometimes when Barack Obama, how many times one night and a night for you. So you get something else, you go like, oh, okay, well, I'll do it. Then you get something else, you go, okay, I'll do it. And you end up hitting that send button 3 or 4 times in a night. So yeah, you want to encourage people to get them excited about what you're doing and how to support you. I'll tell this really quick story. There was a woman who used to send, and unfortunately, she sent once, and she was sending like $1, like a single dollar, and she'd always write a letter. And it was, she was an older woman, so it was like really, the handwriting was really hard to read. And then I got this letter, and it said she was sending this dollar, and she was saying she was in her house and she couldn't get out of her house, and that she wrote me this letter saying she really couldn't get out of her house. And so I went over to her house and I found her house, and I was out there yelling and yelling and yelling, and knew her every single, she was there, and her son came over every single day. And her son showed up, and he said, yeah, it was his mom, and that she was elderly, and he checked in on her every single day. But I tried to ask a lot of questions, and I found out that she was really okay. Their children, they really looked after her, but she lives in this big old house by herself, but she still sent this dollar to the museum. But, I started telling people about it, and people got really interested, and they started sending their money. We got a number of donations, because telling this story about this woman who would send this dollar religiously to the museum every month. And, people wanted to, it became a whole conversation, but also about, not just about her and people in the community, but how people supported the museum. And people started telling their own stories about how Dr. Wright had got them involved in the museum, and they would send their checks. So there are lots of ways that we can get people interested and, committed to what we're doing.
Thank you. Well, we are just at about time, but I do want to close with a question that is particularly important to the commission. We operate with a set of guiding values. We craft these values as a team every year. And so this final question was created by my team in alignment with one of our values for this year. It's about self-care and staff care. So would each of you just quickly talk about self-care and staff care as a sustainability tool for Black cultural heritage leaders and practitioners across our field?
Well, I'm not a good person to, I didn't set a good example, because I unfortunately, I learned from people like Dr. Wright, Rowena Stewart, and, a lot of Joan Maynard, all of those people who worked. And they were, in the beginning, I learned a lot from them, but one of the things that I do is I really try very hard not to provide myself as an example to young people or people that I work with and talk with. I talk to them very much about how to take care of themselves. It is important that they take care of themselves. It is important that they look to take care of staff, that they encourage people that this is not their life. They need to put in their time, put in their hours, and go home, or find something else to do. You may come back to the institution, but it is not something you do 24 hours a day and 7 days a week. That you really look for ways to refresh yourself and renew yourself. You look for ways to renew the staff. And the things that I did, I was very creative about being able to do staff meetings in which we held like we used to play games, we had prizes, and really sort of participate and learn to sort of get to know each other in those kind of ways. Because oftentimes as African American museums, we don't have the money to take the staff you know, to someplace for a retreat. But you can try to do it at your own institution. Really work to put aside that money to bring in somebody to really work with your staff and have sessions where they can talk about things and learn and renew themselves. Find ways, you go to foundations and look for grants to be able to send your staff to other meetings or workshops and all of those things. Look for ways to really try to grow and work with the staff. Succession planning is extremely important. The one thing that you do is really work to find to create leadership that can go. If they're not going to be the leader of your institution, they can go other places. Really do succession planning. And it's not just at the leadership level, it's at all levels. And that's including bringing in students to learn the field, to learn the areas, so that as African American museums, we are creating really relevant, competent, well-trained staff for all museums, not just African American museums, but to go everywhere. And I know that oftentimes in terms of people, being able to diversify.
Great. Thank you. Vedet?
Well, I'm probably taking a page out of Juanita's book, because I don't really practice really good self-care, but I make sure that my staff does. So I don't necessarily practice what I preach. I have yet to figure out the balance, like work-life balance. And that's because I feel like AAAM is always on for me. AAAM is a national and international organization. So a lot of times my museums that are on the West Coast, I stay up with them, but I enjoy it. So I guess for me, my self-care is really just sewing into my members. I want to make sure that they're taken care of. My staff, I want to make sure that they're doing the right thing. I think the most thing that I've done for myself through COVID is just I eat a lot of Reese's cups. I probably shouldn't, but those are my vices. I have a whole bottom drawer right next to me. And if you guys saw it, you'd be like, oh my gosh, she might have a problem. And I just found out that Hershey's will send you 2 pounds of Reese's cups, the king size, not the like little tiny ones. So I'm probably, if you prick me really quickly, I think I would have chocolate pouring out of my veins. But so it's been, Reese's cups and cake, and then my kid and my family. So I really don't have much time for anything else other than that. But it's very important for me. It's just very important that my staff feels like they can take a break. Just because I'm on doesn't mean that they have to be on. And once they realize that, really quickly, they said, oh, so you're logged in, but I don't have to be. And I said, absolutely. You need to have a life. I mean, of course, I probably need to have some counseling now that I'm talking about all of this. I think that I need to learn real good work-life balance. But I feel that, they're not good to me if they don't feel happy, if they don't feel content and feel that, I'm sewing into them. So that's really what I do. Unfortunately. So I guess it's a gift and a curse in some ways. That probably should not have been the question, Angela. I felt like you should probably just
No, but I think that's important because we're talking about real life here, right? And a number of people on this call are leaders of small to medium cultural institutions. And so I think sort of just leaning into that reality that we don't always do as good of a job as we can, and maybe be challenged to do better. That's something, because I'm hearing you. I'm in the same boat.
Yeah, and I just realized that Sundays I take myself off on a Sunday. completely.
Yeah.
Just because, you know, you just need, obviously my body told me I needed time. I'm not in my 20s anymore. So, you know, I might not look it, but I'm not.
Yeah.
Well, I will just add that I'm often asking my colleagues and folks that work for me or just part of the broader community, align your purpose, your passion, and your expertise. And that is hopefully a trifecta that will bring you joy, even in moments of difficulty. And if you are outside of that, then you are often not happy about your work and aren't being fulfilled in what we do, which is really important. And as everyone said, it's hard to clock in and out. Literally, this work lives with you. It's deeply embedded in our DNA. And so my personal well-being is lighting a candle at 9 o'clock at night and just, you know, having the lights down, meditating, being reflective about my day and my purpose. First thing I do in the morning is I get up and I take a walk around the neighborhood and just have the air to touch my skin and feel like I'm interacting and being part of one with nature. And I think just those little moments where you can just sit and be reflective or just sit in quiet, you know, that can be restorative and healing.
Thank you. And so just to repeat back some of what I heard very quickly, enable your staff to have fun, create opportunities of fun for them. Help your staff to understand that it is okay and absolutely necessary to disconnect, even though this work lives with us. We don't have to live in it constantly. And then also, to Brent's point, you can do small things for self-care, whether that is taking a walk, lighting a candle, journaling. Again, I think sometimes self-care sounds big psychologically, but again, you can take small opportunities to do what you need to do to care for yourself. And so with that, I want to thank each of you for caring for me as a professional and caring for the commission, right? And being steadfast friends of the commission. To Juanita, thank you so much for your time today. For our folks on the call, again, this is a giant in our field. So the ways in which she makes herself available for opportunities like these, the way she invests in folks like Brent, myself, Vedet, the way that she invests in the field is incredible. So thank you, Juanita. Vedet, thank you to you and to AAAM for always being a partner and a supporter of the commission. I'm so grateful that you can make yourself available for today. And then Brent, thank you for your time today as well. It's been a joy and a pleasure to connect with you in North Carolina, specifically around the Nina Simone House. And so it's great to have you back connecting to our constituents and our stakeholders in a different way this go around. Thank you each for your time today.